It was almost 2 weeks ago when the news broke that the Acolyte, the biggest Star Wars failure we've ever seen on Disney Plus, had officially been canceled. No season 2 for Leslie Headland and Amanda Stenberg and the cast and crew of the Acolyte, deservedly so. This shouldn't have got greenlit in the first place and certainly should not have had a season 2 after wasting $180 million on this project that, quite frankly, people were not interested in. And despite the fact that the handful of people out there that did truly enjoy the Acolyte and they wanted more, they got together. They started a campaign, #Renew the Acolyte, and their petition is even sitting at over 60,000 signatures right now. Unfortunately for them, that is meaningless in the grand scope of things because these are all the people that actually watched it in the first place. But the vast majority of Star Wars fans, if they did give it a chance, they didn't like it. Overwhelmingly, people despised the Acolyte, the people they could actually convince to tune in. But now, finally, we had Amanda Stenberg's response just a few days ago, where Amanda Stenberg, the star of the Acolyte, the two-time star of the Acolyte, because she played 2 lead roles as Osha and May. And even though I do feel like her performance was nothing worth writing home about, I thought it was fairly pathetic at times. She is certainly not the reason the Acolyte failed. The Acolyte failed because of the writing and the entire concept for the show to begin with. But when Amanda Stenberg came out halfway through the show's release and released a diss track on Star Wars fans, that certainly didn't help. And in her 8-minute discussion that she posted on Instagram Live, she talked about how the Acolyte had been canceled. And she talked about how, it's sad because I saw so many fans out there and you guys were doing your ships and sending me artwork and stuff like this. But did she ever acknowledge the reality that no one actually watched this show? That it was the least viewed Star Wars show in history when it comes to these live action Disney Plus series? Nah, she didn't want to mention that at all. She didn't want to say anything about that. Instead, she blamed the cancellation on the alt-right, on hyper-conservatives, bigots, and racists out there. You can't make this shit up. No, this is not a headline from 2016 or 2017. This is actually headlines from the past weekend. The Acolyte star Amanda Stenberg slams targeted attack by the alt-right on the Star Wars show. Amanda Stenberg blames the Acolyte cancellation on hyper-conservative bigotry. Acolyte star blames bigotry, vitriol, prejudice, and hatred for the cancellation of the Star Wars series. This is insane. The idea that you're saying that it's a handful of people, just a tiny pocket of Star Wars fans, that they have so much influence, they have so much power over people to make them not watch a show, and that's why it's a complete and total failure. That is giving people way too much power that you just seemingly disagree with, labeling them alt-right, saying it's just hyper-conservative bigotry. That is bullshit. There are plenty of people on both sides of the political aisle that think the Acolyte is hot garbage and shouldn't have been renewed. This is going back to the same old playbook that we've seen from Disney and from Lucasfilm, and specifically from Star Wars, over and over and over again. It hasn't worked before. It's not going to work now. Instead of just acknowledging that there might be people out there that don't like your shit, that couldn't possibly be the case. It has to be racism, misogyny, and bigotry. And it really reminded people, including the Star Wars Holocron account, which is just a fucking joke, by the way. Throwback to Ewan McGregor defending Obi-Wan Kenobi co-star Moses Ingram following racist attacks. Love this. Yes, 3 years ago, when Ewan McGregor came out, when their show, Obi-Wan Kenobi, was getting highly criticized, and the actress who played Reva was being highly criticized for her acting and for the character in general, they did the same thing. They tried to gaslight everyone into thinking, into believing that the only people speaking out about this must just be racist, must just be misogynists out there. That there's not a lot of them in Star Wars, we promise. It's just a small handful of racists out there. Another show that was a complete and total failure from a viewership standpoint. Opened up pretty high, a lot of excitement about the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. But when people saw what it was, very quickly, that viewership fell off. That's why there hasn't been a season 2. That's why people aren't clamoring for the next season of Kenobi, because the first one was such a disappointment. And when Star Wars, even the Star Wars official Twitter account, decided to try to gaslight people into believing the only people speaking out about this series in a bad way, it's just because they're racist, This backfired in a massive fucking way. And maybe some people, like the social media accounts, have learned their lesson about that because they have not gotten involved in this after the cancellation of the Acolyte. But it's clear that the actresses themselves, no, they're not shying away from that. Amandla Stenberg has no possible sense that in her mind, it could have just been that people didn't like the show. They needed someone to blame for it. They needed to blame the fans once again for their own failures. That's what this show was, a catastrophic failure. Nobody tuned in, and the handful of people that did overwhelmingly did not like this show. The top 10 criticisms of this show have nothing to do with race or identity politics, right? Is there stuff in there about that? Absolutely. I myself have talked about that a lot, especially when you look at how this show is developed and why this show is developed. When identity politics is first and foremost in your mind ahead of actually entertaining people and telling a compelling story, it's going to be a problem. When you hire writers, not because they care about Star Wars or have any knowledge of Star Wars, but instead because they might be a woman or black or gay, you're already saying we're not looking for the best person for the job. We just want to check off these boxes. And that's what we saw with The Acolyte. From the casting to the crew, both in front of and behind the camera, it was all about identity politics and diversity and representation. And when that happens, your story will suffer. And what we ended up getting was the gayest Star Wars ever, the most diverse and representative Star Wars show ever. We also got the worst product they've ever put out. And that's saying something, considering how bad Disney Star Wars has been for the past 12 years. These people will never admit that maybe, just maybe, people don't like the product they're putting out. They're always going to try to pass the buck and blame the fans for their failures.